Spring auctions hot in Sydney and Melbourne. Why bidders are busting the reserve for homes under the hammer.
Congratulations, ma'am. $1,110,000.
There you go, another lucky buyers. Only $1,110,000, which I think is 1.11 million for this lovely home, which I think we'll have a chance to have a quick peek at later on. But first, I suppose it's a little bit unfair for me to be talking about and mentioning some of the kind of negative comments on my previous video that touched on the climate change, global warming, whatever you like to call it, fee campaign by governments and let's call them globalists. We've all seen the child from Sweden, Greta. I'm not going to make any comments on it except one word, hysteria. Going back to some of the comments, some of the obviously regular kind of viewers would make a comment that I agree with you with everything you provide as far as the investment and property and your opinions and back of the napkin kind of calculation and analysis, which is fair enough. I agree with you that the government and the globalists and the central banks have created asset bubbles, including a property bubble. I agree with you that they're telling us or giving us a false picture about the current status of the economy. We agree with you when you say that the banks and the governments and the real estate agents are spruiking the properties. They are talking out of their backside. They're talking their own book. Properties are way overvalued. Politicians will say one thing during the campaign and then completely flip after they've gone into government. But you know, one thing they can't lie to you about is the climate change. You know, it's not in their interest to control you completely. It's not in their interest to put carbon tax on you. It's not in their interest to tell you what you can, what you can't do. They don't really want to control you over something that it's really hard to do much about or prove or disprove. And it's such a long period of time that you can't comprehend it and your brain's too small. So we're just going to put these scientists that which and who, by the way, are uh, funded by the government bodies and alike, and we'll say anything we want them to say. But that would have been too much of a lie. They can't be possibly lying about that. Okay, enough cynicism. I actually think they're all actors. Anyone who believes in this stuff probably believes in anything. Very disturbing. Well done, UN. All I want people to do is to think before they swallow up anything that government serves them or scientific bodies that are largely funded by us. But it's a scientific fact, is not an argument. Just look into it a little bit. That's all. I did a long time ago. But it looks like they're ramping up the agenda. Now back to busting bubbles, and not just property bubbles, but people's bubbles. Many of my bubbles have been burst in my life by learning new things, finding out the truths. U.S. house prices. This is the index. I bet that when people had a look at this chart and when it was looking that it was turning around and going back up, only to drop down one more time and then, oh, this got to be it. It's coming back up and then drop again and again. So it went once, twice, three times up before it actually found its bottom, just before the around 2012, which is when it turned around and it pretty much almost, if not exactly, broke the record high that was set in about 2006. Ireland house price index from the macrobusiness.com.au. So macrobusiness.com.au, Ireland house price index. Also, there was a peak there, then it dropped a little bit. It was obviously a bull trap that it came back up. It didn't break the high, which means it is the dead cat bounce or the bull trap, and it kept going down, and then it turned around. And I'm sure that people at that time, and you can find all the articles from the papers and all around that was saying this is it, the property is turning around, only to turn back down for another 2 years down before it finally started to recover. So let's see how the current bull trap or the dead cat bounce is occurring in Australia, in my humble opinion, on this 26th of September 2019. Oh, by the way, this is the backyard of the lovely house that was sold for $1.11 million in Sydney, I believe. Part of that report that we're going to see. It is a terrace house. It's probably a sought after location. and yeah, you can't swing a cat in it.
House hunters are back on the prowl in Australia's biggest cities with frenzied bidding at some auctions, pushing prices way over reserves. Bidders have been lured by low interest rates and the promise of more cuts from the RBA. Prices in Sydney and Melbourne are on the rise again, but with household debt at an historic high and the banking regulator may be forced to clamp down on borrowers yet again. Finance correspondent Philip Lasker has the story.
At $980,000, what a delightful home it is.
Is the big city property boom making a comeback?
Million a bid, I bid $1 million now, at $1 million, 10, million and 10 by...
The price didn't square with what Jake and Catherine had in mind.
Yeah, way more.
A lot more. We were sort of hoping around the 950 mark and it just blew.
And these first home buyers have their theories about why it's happening.
It seems like there's not much on the market and everyone's
Lovely
fighting,
house.
scrabbling over the little that is available, and maybe that's what's starting to drive the prices up. I know maybe 3 months ago I don't think this would have got what it got.
That view is endorsed by mortgage broker Bruce Carr.
The biggest driver in the market is the shortage of properties for sale.
Listings are down sharply in the big cities and the auction clearance rate is high. Property hunters have emerged after being scared off by the election and the opposition's proposals to wind back negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions.
I'd say the main driver would be the absence of that tax uncertainty and interest rate cuts.
Regulators have also eased lending restrictions imposed before the Royal Commission.
There's been a lot of pent-up demand, and now that we've got an increased ability for people to borrow, we've got lower interest rates, people are jumping back into the housing market.
Some reject the notion that banks are driving another boom.
Banks are being more vigilant in assessing borrowers' living expenses. They've had a lot of pressure from regulators in that area.
First home buyers, Jake and Catherine, both with full-time jobs and no kids, were disappointed with their lender's support.
Yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't what we wanted, but still enough for us to be able to work with.
When we look at borrowing in aggregate, credit growth in aggregate, the growth rates are still very weak rather than strong. So I don't think we're back into a situation where we should be concerned around rising debt levels. I think that's a little bit premature.
Sydney and Melbourne account for around 60% of the country's residential property market, and prices there have been rising by more than 1% a month. September's on track to deliver a similar result. It's unsustainable.
Most people are quite surprised by how rapid the rebound in values have been, and as well, I think as we head further into spring, the thought was that the increase in stock available for sale would slow down the market, but it clearly seems as if there's quite a lot of depth of demand in the market at the moment.
So Cameron Cusher says the banking regulator may be forced to tighten the screws on lenders yet again.
If we continue to see this kind of growth in the housing market, then we'll have more concerns around the high levels of household debt, deteriorating housing affordability. We might actually see APRA come back in with some other macro-prudential policies to try and tighten up that lending environment again.
I honestly don't think that's what APRA or anyone else is going to do to slow the market that was on shaky ground and everybody was, trembling. Banks, real estate industry, government were all shaking their boots because the revenue was going to dry up because the property downturn. So they're not going to try and prick the bubble. No way. If anything, they'll try and inflame it even more, in my humble opinion.
So, congratulations!
Interest rates are set to go even lower and peak property season is upon us, both factors potentially driving prices higher. Those that dismiss the threat expect more sellers to emerge, helping to keep a lid on prices. They also say lenders are extremely limited in their ability to pass on lower rates and will soon not be able to ease lending restrictions in line with falling interest rates.
How much have we got to go in your estimation?
We're about 1/4% from the floor. Yeah.
But for now, at least, Jake and Catherine are forced to modify their dream.
I think we've sort of understood now with the market, you could still live a little bit further out and it could just be one train station away.
All sold, congratulations, ma'am. $1,110,000.
That's what people are paying for 76 square metres of well-located dirt in Sydney.
He said it. I didn't say it. It's pretty much what I was thinking. And here's one of the ways they do it.
Philip Lasker there. Australia's population clock is ticking, nearing 25.5 million people and projected to approach 30 million in the next decade. While it's the federal government that sets the population policy, it's the states and territories that are left to plan and foot the bill for congestion, housing, services and roads. The government has spruiked its population plan in Sydney today, reiterating its annual cap on permanent migrants that it's lowered from 190 to 160,000. But if you include temporary migrants, and the level is actually much higher and rising. It's now sitting at more than... The government has spruiked its population plan in Sydney today, reiterating its annual cap on permanent migrants that it's lowered from 190 to 160,000. But if you include temporary migrants, and the level is actually much higher and rising. It's now sitting at more than 250,000. Federal Population Minister Alan Tudge acknowledged population growth is causing problems.
Many Australians who live in Melbourne, Sydney and South East Queensland in particular are really feeling the congestion pressures.
See, they acknowledge that population growth is causing problems. They're on your side, didn't you know? They're not going to do squat about it though. But keep it up. Just remember this bubble. It's the stages in a bubble chart. So remember this chart. Going up, total peak, crazy, exponentially going up, comes down, turns around, bull trap or dead cat bounce. Looks like it's returned to normal, only to come crashing down, ending in tears. But how do I know? I don't. Nobody can tell. History, however, is not on property side, I don't think. Okay, that'll do it. Thanks for watching and bye for now.